building an economy that finally works for working families. We started with the American Rescue Plan. That's taken us from economic crisis to economic resurgence.
Meanwhile, Biden's Fed Chair Janet Yellen noted the hardships Americans are facing, but again said we are not in a recession.
Inflation is way too high, and it's essential that we bring it down, and that's something that Americans feel every day, and I think it's what's causing them tremendous distress. And of course, that is President Biden's, our administration's top economic priority to do that. But we're not in a recession. The labor market is exceptionally strong.
Last week, Senator Elizabeth Warren fired back at Fed Chair Jerome Powell over the Fed's decision to raise interest rates as a tool to combat inflation. And she warned that unemployment would rear its head as a result. Let's watch.
Rate increases make it more likely that companies will fire people and slash hours to shrink wage costs. Rate increases also make it more expensive for families to do things like borrow money for a house. And so far, the cost this year of a mortgage has already doubled. Inflation is like an illness, and the medicine needs to be tailored to the specific problem. Otherwise, you could make things a lot worse. And right now, the Fed has no control over the main drivers of rising prices, but the Fed can slow demand by getting a lot of people fired and making families poorer. And while President Biden is working to increase energy supplies and straighten out supply chain kinks and break up monopolies and bring down prices, you could actually tip this economy into recession. So I just want to say, you know what's worse than high inflation and low unemployment? It's high inflation and a recession with millions of people out of work. And I hope you'll reconsider that as you drive this, before you drive this economy off a cliff.
Warren isn't alone. According to The Intercept's Ken Klippenstein, the Federal Reserve's own economists are warning of a severe recession if the Fed continues to hike interest rates. According to Ken, and as Elizabeth Warren pointed out, interest rate hikes are a way to put economic power back in the hands of the very rich by driving up unemployment, since higher interest rates make it more expensive for banks to loan people money, leading to less investment, like hiring workers, for example.
Yeah, we've talked on this show and to a number of economists about whether or not the Fed is basically using a blunt tool. When all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and that's what's happening here with these interest rate hikes. And it is interesting to have a more robust conversation happening about the kinds of interventions that could be done in the alternative. Now, we're seeing in places like the UK, even their conservative government saying, okay, we see a crisis with energy costs, we're going to cap energy costs at $2,000 a family. And I would be interested to see if those kinds of interventions ever become popular here, although I'm skeptical given that in the UK and in parts of Europe, those kind of interventions are the result of the kind of labor uprising, which is only beginning to rear its head in the United States.
Well, also in that, I watched more of that clip online. Elizabeth Warren mentions that, the energy, she asks Jerome Powell about, will this, what you're doing, help with energy costs? And he says, well, no, probably not.
Yeah.
And she acknowledges that largely when we're talking about the energy problem, we're talking mostly about the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Mm-hmm. But then we move on, and obviously Jerome Powell doesn't have anything to do with that policy specifically, or I guess neither does Elizabeth Warren, because no one votes on these things. No, it's just up to Biden's discretion to just participate in this war. And so I'm wondering, with the good news, we haven't talked about this yet because you're just joining us for the week now. The good news that Ukraine had over the weekend, they had some military successes. They took back significant amounts of territory, and that which good for them. They are the defense in this war. However, I was also seeing a lot of, kind of mainstream commentary in response to that along the lines of, they could win the war any day now. They could, the Putin regime will be toppled. And that sounds, it's hard to know if that's true. It doesn't sound true. It sounds unlikely, in fact. And a lot of these same people are the people that I can remember from, 15 or 20 years ago saying, oh, yeah, we're about to, win everything in Iraq and Afghanistan, et cetera. So I want to be cautious. But the Ukrainians doing better, unless that changes Russia's course of action and makes them think, okay, yeah, we really do want to pursue a diplomatic measure, that could cause more energy hardship because they're winning, and so there's going to be a doubling down and a greater investment.
Appetite.
I mean, there's a doubling down if they're winning or if they're losing, but especially if they're winning, there's going to be, oh yeah, we just have to hold on a little bit longer. The end's in sight, even though we know so often from these these other related conflicts, the end is never actually in sight.
Yeah, look, every war ends with diplomacy, and the question is whether or not the fighting actually makes the settlements that are ultimately going to be reached more or less likely. And so this is why I think it's so important, and why so many people, particularly on the quote-unquote far left, have been trying to emphasize the root causes of the conflict, not to assign blame to Ukraine or absolve Putin of responsibility or Russia of a responsibility, but to say we have to understand what instigated this crisis to have a sense of what is going to ultimately lead Russia to want to back off. And again, the expansion of NATO is this, unspoken quantity that's still hanging in the air that isn't really affected by any of the fighting that's happening right now. And it'll be interested to see, will this make Ukraine and the West feel more emboldened about its ability to continue the expanse of NATO? If so, does that really mean that Russia is going to cool its jets right now? And ultimately, if it really is about that as a fundamental issue, is any of this fighting going to militate one way or the other?
Right. It would be great if these successes led to, okay, Ukraine has just won a big victory. Now let's negotiate again. Let's actually have this end to this war the estimates now, I was talking about this yesterday with Bachi, we don't know exactly, but there's credible estimates of 50,000 Russian casualties so far. I mean, these people are dying for nothing, for the young people's lives lost, horrible for their families. It's just, war is bad. It's really bad. It's something to be avoided at all costs, and it's crippling our economy here.
Global economy. Well, Wall Street is already ringing the alarm on the economy. Yesterday, the highest number of S&P 500 companies cited recession on a quarter two earnings call since 2012, according to FactSet. While Goldman Sachs is reportedly preparing to lay off workers across the company as soon as next week. According to the New York Times, Goldman reported in July that its second quarter profit had dropped nearly 50% from a year before. I mean, it's interesting. We don't really talk about
I can tell you're devastated that Goldman Sachs is laying off people. I can see the, do you need...
Well, look, Robby, the reality is, and we've talked about this as well, that companies like this, not just banking companies, but companies, across this kind of a sector, have been experiencing record profits in 2020, 2021 as the pandemic raged. Billionaires saw the largest increase in wealth that I think that they have seen historically. So it'd be interesting to understand better whether or not this is reflective of more of a return to normal and how much this reflects an actual dip in the economy.
Well, right, because the shutting down of the economy that was done during the pandemic was not across the board.
Right.
If, people who had small businesses, they suffered. It was hard to make payroll. They had to rely on subsidies from the government to the payments made to people to keep them afloat. Meanwhile, some major tech companies, Zoom, the companies that really thrived because we were all trapped in our houses, and
Amazon as well.
And look, I don't have a ideologically, I don't have a natural hostility to big businesses making profits. That's fine by me. Don't care. But if it's done if their profits are greater because the government forbid other people to make money and at their behest, and what do these tech giants want everybody socially distanced and shut in their home forever because that's how you sell more things on Amazon? Probably. So we have to be very wary of obviously you don't do this. I try not to either. Just cheerleading the successes of big organizations, big businesses.
Right.
When it's not always. I think it's often in people's benefits because those profits are because they're selling things people want. But it has to be a fair. Right. A level playing ground in an environment in which the government says, well, this sector is canceled, this is okay, you can operate on this side, this is that's not fair.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that it does look like Goldman Sachs' annual income for 2021 was $21 billion, a little over $21 billion. And that was up 137% increase from 2020. And now they're back down to $15.7 billion as of June 2022, like that 12-month cycle. So it does seem to be does seem that it experienced a little bit of that COVID peak that so many companies did that were able to profit off of the crisis. And while this might not be a return to normal entirely, it does seem to be a little bit of that, because look, in 2019, it does seem to be somewhat of a return to normal. So we'll see how that continues to shape out.
And we have some actual inflation numbers to share with you now. While gas prices are down, so there are some other numbers reflecting what Americans are seeing in other sectors. Food is up 13.5%, rent is up 6.7%, electricity 15.8%, health insurance up 24.3%, which is killer.
Yeah.
So the people are really suffering on a variety of fronts, and even though the gas situation has improved, which is good, probably largely responsible for Democrats no longer looking like they're going to get wiped out in November, the economy is far from working as it should.
Yeah, and then we'll see if we can get some bipartisan solutions on that healthcare piece. Unfortunately, Joe Biden is talking obviously about this prescription drug plan, but even that has largely gotten approval from the pharmaceutical industry. It's only focused on a small portion of the most expensive drugs, which is important, obviously, but far from the kind of overhaul that you'll need to get those numbers down to a place that they should be. Regardless, I am anxiously awaiting your radar next, Robby.